some of the most serious crimes in history weren't hidden forever. They were just denied until documents forced the truth out into the open. What you're about to hear isn't speculation. Every case in this series has been confirmed through archives, court findings, or official admissions. In this first part, we'll examine several of history's most consequential cover-ups, how they were planned, why they were hidden, who was harmed, and what happened when the truth finally emerged. We begin with a program that permanently changed how citizens understood their own government. In 1971, a small group of ordinary Americans broke into an FBI office in Pennsylvania. They didn't steal money or weapons. They stole documents. Inside those files was the name of a secret program, COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO stood for Counterintelligence Program. Officially, it existed to protect national security by monitoring extremist threats. That was the justification. In reality, the program targeted lawful political movements inside the United States. Civil rights organizations, anti-war groups, black political movements, and left-wing organizations were all placed under surveillance. Internal FBI memoranda show that the goal was not simply to observe these groups. It was to disrupt them. Field offices were instructed to create internal conflicts, spread false rumors, forge letters, and destroy reputations. One memo explicitly stated the goal of preventing the rise of a single leader who could unify and inspire the movement. The purpose was not arrests or public trials. The purpose was neutralization. Movements could be weakened quietly, without ever acknowledging state involvement. The harm was real and lasting. Activists lost jobs. Families were torn apart. Organizations collapsed at critical moments in the fight for civil rights and political reform. Because the program was secret, victims had no proof and no protection. Publicly, the FBI denied everything. Anyone who complained about harassment or surveillance was dismissed as paranoid or dangerous. That denial allowed the damage to continue for years. When the stolen documents were published, journalists verified them and congressional investigations followed. COINTELPRO was confirmed in detail. The program was shut down and oversight mechanisms were introduced. But no senior officials were criminally prosecuted. The long-term impact was a permanent fracture in public trust, and the realization that a democracy can be undermined quietly, through secrecy and fear, without ever suspending elections. Now let us move back in history to a cover-up where secrecy was used not to suppress dissent, but to erase mass murder itself. In the spring of 1940, thousands of Polish prisoners of war were taken into forests across Soviet-controlled territory. They were officers, judges, doctors, professors, and military leaders. They were executed and buried in mass graves. This operation became known as the Katyn massacre. Archival records later showed that the decision was approved at the highest levels of the Soviet government. The purpose was strategic. By eliminating Poland's leadership class, future resistance could be prevented before it began. When mass graves were discovered during World War II, the Soviet government immediately blamed Nazi Germany. That explanation became official state policy. Soviet propaganda reinforced it, and any alternative explanation was treated as hostile misinformation. The cover-up was comprehensive. Documents were destroyed or classified. Witnesses were silenced. Polish families were forbidden from publicly mourning or investigating. Historians who questioned the official story were censored. The harm lasted for decades. Families lived without truth or justice. Polish history was systematically falsified. Public memory was reshaped by force. In 1990, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, the government finally admitted responsibility. Original NKVD documents were released, confirming that Soviet security forces carried out the executions. No criminal trials followed. No individual perpetrators were held accountable. The lie had lasted longer than the regime that created it, leaving behind generational trauma and deep mistrust toward state narratives. Now let's move forward to a different war, where civilians were killed and military language was used to erase them. On March 16, 1968, U.S. soldiers entered the Vietnamese village of My Lai. They had been told enemy fighters were present. That intelligence was wrong. What followed was hours of sustained violence against unarmed civilians. Men were executed, women were assaulted, children were killed at close range. Entire families were wiped out. This event became known as the My Lai massacre. At the time, U.S. military strategy in Vietnam relied heavily on body counts as a measure of success. Commanders were under intense pressure to demonstrate progress. After My Lai, official reports described the operation as a successful engagement with enemy forces. Civilian deaths were omitted or minimized. That language was not accidental. By labeling civilians as combatants, the reports erased victims and protected those higher up the chain of command. Complaints were ignored. Internal investigations were delayed. The cover-up preserved careers, maintained morale, and avoided political fallout, while survivors were left with trauma and silence. The truth emerged only when a whistleblower reported the massacre and journalists pursued the story. Photographic evidence confirmed survivor testimony. Public outrage followed. Military investigations confirmed that the massacre had occurred. Only one officer was convicted, and he served a short sentence under house arrest. No senior commanders were held criminally responsible. The long-term consequences were severe. Public trust in military reporting collapsed. My Lai became a global symbol of how war crimes can be hidden behind bureaucracy, hierarchy, and carefully chosen words. Now let's examine a case where a cover-up didn't hide violence after it happened, but helped justify an entire war before the public knew the facts. In August 1964, Americans were told that U.S. naval ships had been attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. Not once, but twice. These reports were used to justify a major escalation of the Vietnam War. Internally, intelligence officials questioned whether the second attack had occurred at all. Radar signals were unclear. Reports were contradictory. Those doubts were not shared with the public or Congress. The purpose was political clarity. Correcting the record would have complicated the push toward war, so the claim was allowed to stand. Decades later, declassified documents confirmed the truth. The second attack never happened. The consequences were immense. Millions of people died. Entire regions were destabilized. American society was deeply divided for generations. No one was prosecuted for the false claims. The long-term effect was permanent skepticism toward official war narratives and a lasting distrust of secrecy justified in the name of national security. These were only a few of the cover-ups that moved from denial to documented history. Many more followed the same pattern, and some are still unfolding. For more proven cover-ups and the evidence behind them, continue with Part 2. Thanks for watching.